was reminded of the cyclical nature of things on Friday when I was officially released from prison in the morning, and then found that my friend Sandra Steingraber was taken into custody that day to serve a 15-day jail sentence for blockading some fracking sites in upstate New York. Sandra is a well-known anti-fracking activist in upstate New York, and she has kids that are 11 and 13. And her and a few other folks blockaded a developing fracking site that stores the waste from fracking that was going into her neighborhood and was threatening her water supply. And Sandra and a few others refused to pay their fine, and so they got a 15-day jail sentence instead. So right as I was coming out, she was going in. And she came to visit me here at Ken Sanders Bookstore a few months ago. And when she was here, she told me a story about a friend of hers that was a retired, was a retired elementary school teacher. And this friend of hers had been teaching kids for a long time. And in the 60s, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, this friend of hers had a class of third graders. And while at the height of that, when everybody was very scared about what was going to happen, she asked her class of third graders, how many of you think that there will be a nuclear war within your lifetimes? And all the hands in the room went up, except for one. There was one kid that didn't raise her hand. And so naturally the teacher looked at that one kid and said, why do you not think that there will be a nuclear war? Why do you believe something different than everyone else in this room? And that kid said, because my parents are peace activists, and they're going to stop it. And that story to me was really powerful. It made me think about how do we give our kids a hopeful outlook on life? With all the tragedy that they're facing within their lifetimes and all the threats that they face, how do we give them the positive outlook that they need to continue forward in a positive way? And I think a lot of people's natural instinct for that is to hide the worst of the truth from kids, to try to pretend like things aren't really that bad, to shelter the kids and keep them safe. And that's certainly a tactic that a lot of people use, and especially in the climate movement. People not only use that with kids, they use that with adults. Most climate scientists that I've talked to said, I can't really tell the public exactly how bad things are because it would scare them into paralysis. People just couldn't handle how bad the truth really is. And I think that tactic is running up against a brick wall at this point. It's getting too hard to hide the reality. It's getting too hard to shelter both our kids and ourselves. We can't ignore the wildfires that are happening, the floods, the hurricanes, all the impacts that we're already seeing. And so this path of sheltering our kids, it is not going to work. It's not working now, and it's not going to keep working. That's not going to give them hope. What's going to give them hope is our actions, what they see the adults in their lives, their parents, their church community doing. What our actions are doing is what their hope is based on. And so the question for us is, what does that look like? What kind of actions do we need to be taking? There are certainly small actions that we can be taking in our individual lives, but as our kids look around the world, they know it's not small problems that we're facing. They know it's big problems, and it's going to have to take some big actions on our part to give them the hope that they need. And our church community here has one of those opportunities coming up next month when our congregation votes on whether to divest our endowment from fossil fuels. We're taking a congregational vote next month, and this church doesn't have a lot of funds in fossil fuels, but it's got some, and it'll have an impact when we divest. And I think that's when I'm going to need all of you guys to help out, because sometimes the other folks in the congregation, they might get a little confused about things. They might think that getting that a little bit higher return on their money is going to be more important than protecting your future. They might think that leaving you guys a little more money in the church's bank account is going to be more important than leaving you guys a healthy climate. So when that congregational vote comes up next month, I'm going to need all you guys here in the front to remind everybody else here what's more important to you guys, all right? And that's just the beginning. I have no doubt that this church will vote to divest our funds. And the way that divestment works is we're actually making the commitment right now to withdraw all of our funds in fossil fuel investments within 5 years. I think it'll take this church a lot less time than that to get that done. But we here believe in an interconnected web that we are all a part of. That's one of our core principles of Unitarianism. And that's where this comes into play, that interdependent web. Because when we divest, we put pressure on all the mutual funds and investment groups that we are investing in. We put pressure on them to divest. And they have a lot more money than we do. And we also put pressure on the National Unitarian Organization, the UUA. And that's where things can actually get big. A lot of people might not know this, but the UUA, the main body of Unitarianism, has tens of millions of dollars in fossil fuel investments. They have tens of millions of dollars in European oil stocks. And so that's going to be a bigger battle, but also a more important one. And so that's where this church community and you guys here in the front are going to have to put even more pressure on people and remind them even more about what our values are. Because that's going to be perhaps a difficult decision for a lot of people in the UUA. A lot of people who feel like they have a financial responsibility to keep this organization going. But they have moral responsibilities as well. And because there is that large amount of investment in fossil fuels, that's also where it can make a difference. When we divest our little bit here, frankly, the financial world probably won't notice very much. But once we start leveraging our divestment to get those larger organizations to divest, that might have more of an impact. When the UUA goes to their bankers, their mutual fund holders and things like that, and says, we're going to pull out our tens of millions of dollars unless your mutual fund divests from fossil fuels, they've got some leverage. And then once mutual funds start divesting from fossil fuels, then we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars that's getting pulled out, and that can have an impact. And that's where the divestment campaign is going. And it's based on this idea of an interconnected web. We've got a little piece of that, and so we're going to pull. We're not connected to Exxon. We can't change what Exxon is doing, but we have connections in that web, and we can influence them. We can pull on each one of them. And I'd like to wrap up with another story that maybe a lot of people here have heard, the story of when Buddha was a parrot. Do you guys know this story? You haven't heard this story? See, back before Buddha was the little golden statue of a jolly fat man, even back before Buddha was the actual jolly fat man that the golden statue is based on, he was a parrot, and he was living in a forest, a beautiful forest filled with lots of other animals. And he loved the forest, he loved the other animals that he was living with. And one day the gods were up playing with their lightning bolts in the clouds and threw one down in the forest, and it started a fire. And the fire started to spread very rapidly. And a lot of the animals, they couldn't get away, and the fire was overwhelming them, overwhelming the forest. And the parrot took off, and he could fly up above, and he could see this fire sweeping over his forest and threatening all of his friends. And so the parrot didn't know exactly what to do, but he saw a river that was flowing by. And the parrot flew as fast as he could to the river, and he dove all the way into the river, all the way underneath, and he flew back up, and he flew back up over the fire, right into the heart of it. And when he got right into the heart of the fire, he flapped his wings and shook off the water that was on the rest of his body. And it was just a few drops, but it dropped a few drops of water on the fire. And he flew back to the river and dove in again, and back to the fire, and shook his wings, and dropped a few more drops of water onto the fire. And then he went back to the river, and back to the fire. And each time he would get so close that it would singe his wings a little bit, but he would keep going back and forth to the river and to the fire and to the river and the fire. And it would just be a few drops of water. And the gods, they were sitting up in the clouds, and they were watching this, and they said, "Look at that silly little parrot. What does he think he's doing? Look how big that fire is. Look how little that parrot is. He's just dropping a few drops of water. He can't possibly put out that fire. What does he think he's doing? That bird's going to kill itself." And they were all laughing at how silly this bird is that thinks he can put out such a big fire. And there was one god that felt a little bad for the parrot. And so he came down and he said, "Little parrot, look, you're just a little bird. What can you do? You're not going to put out this fire. Look, that's only a few drops. The fire keeps getting bigger. Every time you go back and forth, the fire keeps expanding. Just give up, little parrot. Just save yourself." And the parrot said, "I might not be able to put out the whole fire, but this is what I can do. This is all I can do. It's all I know how to do." And so with that, the parrot flew back to the river one more time and plunged in and back to the fire. And the god saw this. And the god was so moved by this little parrot that had so much passion and was doing everything that it could to protect its forest, that the god started crying. And he cried, and he cried and cried, huge tears that just rained down out of the sky, huge tears down onto the fire. And his tears were so big, he was such a huge god, that his tears started to put out the fire. All over the forest, his tears were flowing, little streams flowing here and there. And soon he had put that fire out. And that story always reminds me of the real power of sacrifice. That the actions that involve more sacrifice are powerful because of their sacrifice. And it's something that I've always kept in mind. Because I know that back when I disrupted an auction, I didn't really think that I could change the oil industry. I didn't really think that I could change the Bureau of Land Management or the federal government that was in cahoots with the oil industry. But I thought that I could change people like you. And I know that people like you have a lot of power. Thank you.